Welcome to my treasure hoard of travel art supplies. This may look like I'm sharing some kind of art haul, but all of these art supplies I've already had for at least a year, some of them 2 or 3 or 4. I brought them all out here to self-reflect a bit and to prepare for some travel sketching that I've planned for the future. To my great shame, my travel sketchbook is still in its early stages. I had started this last year on a short trip to the southern coast of South Korea in Mukpo and Gwangju. And I'd been using the Gouache Autumn set by Holbein in this palette here because it was October, so it felt seasonally appropriate for that. I also sketched on a short hike we went on Jeju Island up Halasan. And starting then, all I really did were quick sketches at events I attended. This is from the Bookcation event, day 2, when I had some free time. I can't even remember what paint I used. Actually, I think it might have been the winter gouache set, this tiny sample. This was winter, so apparently I switched to that, but it's also just great for interior scenes and cityscapes. Speaking of cityscapes, this is probably my favorite spread in here from a short trip to Incheon. And then just more events, like when I'm at an art market, I might pick little details in my surroundings to sketch. I had a day where I apparently focused on shoes. Sometimes a concert that is happening at the same time. So just little sketches that I can paint in between selling an art scene or packaging a postcard print, that kind of stuff. And then I went up Sunrise Peak, Songsan Ilchulbong, nearly a month and a half ago. So that's it. To my great shame, this is all I have in here. And most of these I'd barely even count as travel or landscape sketches, right? But I still enjoy everything in here. I think these are great for practice no matter what. So today I brought out all of these supplies. All of them I've used in the past for travel sketching in some shape or form, and I have used them since not only for travel sketching. Most of these small watercolor palettes are ideal for when I have to do quick color studies, like color concepts for a client piece. I don't want to bring out my full acrylic paint palette. Instead, I'll use watercolor and gouache and draw quick studies with those. Now I have 2 short trips coming up in July. And while I know there's a limitation to how much I can get done when I travel in a group of, in this case, 4 people, take care of like translating and being a bit of a travel guide and maybe the driver as well, I do want to at least get some kind of sketches done. I have some options I'm immediately drawn to because I haven't used them as much. This, for example, was at the back of my drawer and I kind of just didn't reach for them as much. Is anyone else like that? If a material is a bit out of sight or hard to reach, it just kind of doesn't pop into your mind, even though you might like it a lot. I found in the past that these CMYK type palettes are great for summer pieces. They're automatically quite light and bright and saturated, and really enjoyed traveling with these in the past. So tomorrow will be a bit of a travel sketch trial run just to see which materials I'll reach for. I'll toss all of these pretty much in the car, and then when the mood strikes me and we are done with our errands, I'll just grab whatever I want and see what I find practical, what resonates with me, what I missed the most, what materials I still have to practice much more with. I'll also bring a larger sketchbook. You might have seen this one before. It's the cold pressed paper by Arch in one of these travel sketchbooks that you can only find in Korea apparently. And while I've used this one quite a bit for travel sketching in the past, mostly for watercolor but also gouache, it's just not a format that's particularly handy while on the go because it opens to such a wide format. Maybe something like this would be a good format or composition to do while traveling in a group. I was traveling with a friend when I did all of these, and the small format made it so much easier to manage. But yeah, at some point this sketchbook will haunt me in the afterlife if I don't finish it, so might as well bring it along, I guess. The next morning, we first had a bunch of errands to run, and in the wait time between two appointments, I got to do my first sketch at a bakery. I always try to be realistic about travel sketching, or really sketchbooks in general. Not every sketch will happen at a picturesque location in the middle of nature. I just try to find these pockets of time, observe the colors and light around me, and capture a small impression of that to take home in my sketchbook. Here, the tiny baked goods in all their unique shapes caught my eye. The Irodori Autumn palette was a great fit, and with a table to spread out on, I was able to use that larger palette compared to what I'll use later that day. I like that these colors can go very dark, and that while most of them are warm-toned, the indigo paint balances that with an intense, cooler blue. There's another layer to travel sketching when I turn it into a video, the filming. It's a bit awkward to show, but my partner filmed how that looks. I usually end up leaning a portable tripod against my left shoulder for stability, and while I love to bring my proper camera, here I only had my phone with me so that my bag wouldn't be too heavy while hiking. The cafe wasn't busy, so I felt comfortable filming. Usually if there are a lot of people around, I ignore the filming part because I'm a bit embarrassed. I used white gouache to place final highlights, and shortly after we were headed towards the mountains. Our destination was Bulgan, and quickly I had to adjust my expectations to reality. We've had an incredibly rainy and strangely cool June here on Jeju, and while this was one of the nicest days in recent memory, everything was still humid, covered in mist, and with no place to balance my sketchbooks and palettes. So I just let nature wash over me and took some reference photos of moody forest scenes. Just a couple hours later, after our hike, my patience was rewarded as I found the perfect spot for sketching. A lotus pond with carps, frogs and crows shouting over each other in the background, and a bench for me and my supplies. The CMYK Cyan Magenta Yellow, Black and White palette is something I return to every summer. It can mix really beautiful green shades, so no matter if I'm in the Swiss Alps or on a Korean hillside, it automatically creates a really harmonious overall impression. There are some limits though. Mixing the yellow and magenta doesn't really create any very bright oranges and red compared to the vibrancy of the greens, for example. So if you live in a less humid area, maybe more focused on beaches or sandstone or even a desert landscape, this might feel less summery to you and not work as well as a palette. It is my go-to palette for when I don't have a table or anything to lean my sketchbook on, as I can balance the tin with my paints in it easily on my sketchbook or knee. I often carry the actual paint tubes with me as well, but again today the main focus was on hiking and I optimized for that, so I only had the dry paint palette. This year I really want to get into actually carrying a water container with me, a jar of some kind to fill with water on the go, so that I can use larger brushes and create more interesting textures. But somehow even when I carry a foldable cup or something like that in my bag, I always come back to these water brushes. They are just that convenient. Jeju is also usually very windy, so while this particular day was calm, in the past all my experiments with balancing water somewhere have failed quite dramatically. I also don't like bringing water jars of any kind to cafes. There, these water tank brushes also feel kind of safer to use, but I do sometimes feel a bit restricted with these, especially when using watercolors for gouache. They are actually perfect. Reactivating the white paint into a creamy texture to add final highlights and reflections worked beautifully for this pond scene, though I wish I could mix stronger oranges to capture the carpfish better. I also really wanted to sketch some of the deer frolicking around us, but we realized that the park area around Bulgun Odum closes at 6 and had to power walk the rest of the way back. So the next morning, instead, I sat down with the same art supplies I had in my bag for that hike, plus some additional brushes and a proper water jar, and made some time for more mixed media experiments. I really like this palette quite a lot. As you can see, it has this tray that you can turn out for mixing when you have enough space, and I also like the removable little plastic tray. It's much easier to clean, especially on the go. So yeah, I'll probably never stop carrying that one with me. Though I do often at art markets use this tiny wooden palette. My first experiment used a Derwent watercolor pencil in burnt umber. I really like this shade and have been reaching for it quite a lot for the most random sketches. It activates into a beautiful deep brown, and I like the balance of delicate shading, subtle to stronger paint washes, and then the more intense lines when I go back to draw on top of the still wet sketch. I will for sure add this watercolor pencil to my travel sketch kit. It seems like it would combine amazingly with all kinds of mixed media and work for all kinds of nature scenes as well. The green paint on my tiny watercolor palette is one I reach for a lot. While this is a portrait set, I found myself using it for landscapes as well. I don't know how deer work. I'll have to figure that out over the next couple of sketches, but their proportions are really hard for me to capture somehow, despite having video reference of them walking around that park the day before. I used the green watercolor paint by Core for some backgrounds here, little green blobs of paint to hint at grass and leafy shadows. I really like the texture this very flowy paint creates. It looks beautiful on the Arch watercolor paper. And while I then used the same Derwent watercolor pencil, this time it was on top of the still wet watercolors, so the color turned out much more intense. I really despaired with the head shapes and neck shapes of these deer, so white gouache had to come out for the rescue, not that it actually helped all that much. I then used Neocolor II on top of that for some deeper shadows. I still haven't figured out how to use the Neocolor II, but there's something so satisfying about them when I layer them with other media, with watercolors below, gouache on top, or colored pencils. A mixed media tree that I sketched a couple of years ago is still my favorite example of that. Something about the textures and intensity of pigment. These aren't available as open stock at any of the local art shops that I have access to, so I'm tempted to add a couple olive or grass green shades to a future Jackson's art haul. Let me know if you have any specific shades that you recommend for nature scenes, maybe some animals as well. Here I quickly relearned a lesson that I'm pretty sure I've now had to learn multiple times. On the Arch cold pressed paper, less of the Neocolor II is more. The texture of the paper picks up a lot of pigment, even when I use a light touch, and once I go over it with water, there's just so much Neocolor everywhere. I feared I'd messed up the sketch at first, but honestly, after I went into it with white gouache and pushed the paint around for a while, I actually really love how this one turned out. Maybe these crayons are what I need to finally paint in more intense colors and to embrace vibrancy over very soft shading. I am very hesitant usually in my color selections. I'm not great at doing expressive color washes, so maybe these are the exact right tool for me to get over that. While I layer a variety of media for the final sketch background, let's talk about these deer. Because they don't look like deer, but very much like mountain goats. You can see how I try to correct proportions here and there, making the necks longer or the heads more delicate, but I just couldn't get them right. I miss drawing animals, so this might be a much needed wake-up call to practice them some more. The final goat/deer brings together all these media I've now sketched with. Neocolor II, gouache, the Core watercolor I'm obsessed with, and this weird layered approach that I just love. And this is a very real part of my travel sketching. I do sketch on location, but usually also once we're back at a guest house or hotel or after returning home. The point is not only the plein air painting or urban sketching, but about finding new inspiration, doing something different and bringing that home with me. It's also much more practical because the time constraints while traveling can be a bit tricky to manage, right, when you're sketching. So I've just embraced that as part of the process for me, that I will take video footage and photo reference, and then once I return home, maybe the next day, maybe the same evening, I will give those another go, combine them with impressions sketched on location or my recent memories. I've really neglected my sketchbooks for a few months. I've been just very busy with illustration work. I've been trying to be very mindful about burnout and also just taking care of my wrist and shoulder because they've been hurting sometimes if I overdo it a bit. So if I've spent the entire week working on a client piece, even if I maybe want to sketch for a bit, I try to take it easy and give myself some rest, do something else, maybe read a book or do some stretching, which I should probably do more often. But now that I had a day off to go outside and sketch and then also kind of continue that the next morning, I noticed really how much I've missed this part of my art practice. And I can't wait to see what the rest of summer brings, as my schedule is finally looking a bit easier to manage. As I've clawed my way ahead of my schedule, I'm ahead on all my deadlines and feel like I can indulge in some art material experiments, learn something new, practice my watercolor skills, and experiment with media like the Neocolor II that brings something interesting and a bit uncontrollable to my otherwise very slow and deliberate painting style. All the deliberation, layering, and slowness couldn't help this deer to look like the actual deer I saw, though I do think it is less of a goat than the other three. Deer just have the most surreal eyes. They look too large for their heads, but that's just how they are, I guess, and I felt like I'm trying some kind of cartoon character at a certain point. Tried to tone it down again, only to paint the eye back in, and at some point I just had to let it be. I love my layering and relayering, but there's a limit to what even harsh cold-pressed watercolor paper can take. I feel like I dipped my toes back into outdoor sketching that day, and now I'm excited for a couple trips later in July, supplies I'll bring with me to play around with, and the sights to see and paint. Do you have any art materials you've neglected and want to dive back into, or any travel plans for summer that you hope to capture in your sketchbooks? I hope this gave you some idea on how to approach your own travel sketchbooks, be it actually outdoors at a cafe or later in the calm safety of your own four walls. And I hope I'll see you again in my next art video. Thank you so much for watching.